Hi, this is Charlie Mato-Toyela with Blue Bear Flutes. Of course, our website you're aware of probably is bluebearflutes.com. And if you haven't yet, I always like to stop and say, please check out our Instagram. It's a place that we don't make any money off of, and in my opinion, I don't believe we get a lot of customers from seeing our Instagram feed, although I could be mistaken. I think most people see us on YouTube or the web, just what they call organic searching. But our Instagram is the coolest thing in my opinion. I mean, it's basically like a collage of the places we've been and things we've done, and a picture, if you would, of everything that is really cool that we do. So make sure you check it out. It's of course under Blue Bear Flutes as well if you go to Instagram. If you don't have an Instagram account, it's not really that big of a jump from YouTube to Facebook to Instagram. And if there's one of them that you're kind of staying away from because you don't like their politics or whatever the case, I completely understand. But in that particular case, you can actually go to my website, bluebearflutes.com. Down at the bottom right corner on the laptop version, you'll be able to see the icons for Instagram and Facebook and all these kind of things. And the Instagram, of course, is a little camera. If you click on that, it'll bring up our feed there on my website. So you don't even have to have an account or log in or anything. And unlike looking at it just on a web page, once you get scrolled down so far, even if you're not logged in, it'll still show you the rest of them. So make sure you check that out. Really good little app we have on our website. So anyway, today's video is just basically a question and answer, something I've been wanting to do for a little while. It's been a while since I've had an opportunity to make a video, much less a question and answer video, which are some of my favorites because it not only gives me the opportunity to answer some questions a little bit more in depth than maybe what I could in a comment on YouTube or on our Facebook, and also gives me the opportunity to get some feedback and maybe see if I answered your question fully, and in doing so, is this a question that I should lead into another video? So that's kind of a good thing. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get right into it here. We have about 5 questions. One of them's kind of special. I'll leave that one for last. Not that they aren't all special, of course. Everybody's special. I just feel like my questions are more special. Well, I don't want to give it away. So anyway, the first question comes from David W. on the Blue Bear Flutes Facebook group. And he says, I have a question, Charlie. I found a pokeberry plant on my property. That's kind of cool. I've seen it here every year, and it grows pretty thick stalks, which they do. Not all of them get really thick. Some of them get kind of leggy, but depending on where it's at, and his sounds like a pretty thick one. They look perfect for making a flute once they're dried out. It should be pretty big by the end of summer. My question is, are these plants too toxic to use for flute making? Thanks in advance, Charlie. Well, that's a really great question, and although I would like to start off by putting my disclaimer on it, if you feel that it is too toxic, if you do your diligence and search information out on this plant and find out it is too toxic, then by all means, if you think it is unsafe to make a flute with, please don't make a flute with it. Having said that, there's lots of woods that are absolutely toxic that people use to make flutes, and there are lots of finishes, in my opinion, that are incredibly toxic, especially lacquers and such, that most of you think, oh, that's just nothing, but to me, I think that's really taken a little bit too far, using these lacquers that very, very good friend of mine that I spent a lot of time with in my youth, a good friend of mine's father actually, and his father and I worked together for 7 or 8 years doing woodworking, and he eventually passed away kind of quickly and all of a sudden to most of us, and we believe he was a smoker, of course, but he was from the age group, and I'm not giving advice on smoking. If you think it's a good idea to smoke, do so. If you don't think it's a good idea, please quit. I'm not a cigarette smoker myself, but anyway, he was of the age group, in my opinion, that smokers typically just seem cancer passes them by. He was born back in like the 30s and 40s and had been smoking since he was a kid, one of those kind of people. Like my parents, and none of them had developed lung cancer. My friend's dad, though, he did, and passed on pretty quickly. I believe, and most of us believe, was due to the lacquer that he sprayed on furniture that we finished. And we had kind of an open air type setup for spraying, and like myself, a lot of times he would avoid wearing a mask, which is not a good idea, by the way. If you are using finishes and what have you, using a respirator that can protect you from sucking these things down. You know, there's some masks that are okay for some things, and some masks that really are useless. And a respirator is designed to filter out paint particles and lacquer particles and things like that. And there's specific respirators that are made for this too. So don't even think, you know. Anyway, long story short, I know I can get kind of verbose at times, but stay away from lacquers, in my opinion. I mean, this stuff's nasty business. It's just really not, it's not pretty. And people get so accustomed to seeing this shiny, glossy finish and thinking that that's the best thing in the world. And truthfully, it's not. It's a Band-Aid. You know, it's a mental Band-Aid for that matter. It makes you believe something. And if you just stop for a minute and think, how many Native Americans 1,000 years ago sprayed lacquer on their flutes? How many of them? And we can even delve into the shellac that people want to say is natural and safe and comes from the shellac beetle, and it's been used for food and blah, 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 blah. Taking things in your mouth is a little bit different than taking them in your nose or in your eyes, as some of you may have found out. But I can name 100 other beetles that I personally know off the top of my head that I would not want to be eating or drinking or breathing. There's one of them I call a potato bug, or a stink bug is one of my favorite things. And no joke, in Central America, in Mexico, they eat this particular beetle. It's so offensively smelling to me that I mean, it's like we're mortal enemies. You know, that's a terrible, terrible creature. I don't hate them, but you know, I just don't like to get near them. And when they get near me, I know that they're near me because they always spray me. Anyway, just lacquer, shellac, you could call it what you like. If it's not natural, I would stay away from it. I usually use oils and things like this on my flutes. By the way, getting back on topic, some plants are toxic when they're green, and some plants are toxic when they're dry still. And if you hear my sinuses are a little clogged up right now, it's because in the shop we'll be working with cedar, for example, which in its dust form, sawdust of cedar, is kind of mildly toxic, at least the western cedar is. Red cedar, eastern red cedar, not, in my opinion, as much, you know, toxicity there, but that's only from my own observations, not from reading up on it. So having said that, little quick story. Cherokee people have historically eaten pokeberries, like one a day for 7 days. It's part of a custom. Don't try it. Do not try it. I am telling you, do not try this stuff. There's so much stuff that Native people eat that's toxic. Chocolate is one of them. Just stay away from this stuff. But anyway, there's a story about us eating pokeberries to keep us from ever developing arthritis. Having said that, my mom used to make a salve out of pokeberries to help her arthritis, and I've made it for my own, and yes, it does work. It is in Natural Remedies books from the old days. The pokeberry plant is a toxic plant, and people eat, especially in Louisiana and the southeast here, they eat the leaves of the pokeberry bush. There's a song about it called Poke Salad Annie you should listen to. People that cook it usually double boil it. They'll boil it once, strain it out, boil it again to get all the toxins out of it. I'm not recommending eating this stuff. I personally don't eat it. My folks did. I detest the flavor of it. It's just not my kind of thing. I don't like the smell of it. But there again, like I said, see what you think is best. Now, some things too that you touch can be toxic to the touch, and some things can be toxic if you put them in your mouth. A solution for this on a flute, for example, would be to make a mouthpiece out of something else. Just as a suggestion. Myself, I have made personal flutes out of pokeberries and use them, but I'm not recommending it. So, kind of like my dad used to say, 6 of one and half a dozen of another. You know, David, you can try it if you like, but I'm not telling you it's a good idea. You know, it's one of those things, and I do take a real stance on some things, but this one is kind of like my own personal. I would make it for myself, but I would never make them for anybody else, and they do make pretty good sounding flutes, by the way. So lots of other hollow weeds out there like elderberry and oh gosh, so many tons of others. Even ragweed I don't think is toxic in the stalk. The pokeberry root is incredibly toxic. There are medicines Cherokee's made out of it. Anyway, getting on to the next question. And thanks so much for your question, David, by the way. I hope that answers it for you. I know it's probably not the yes or no that most of us really like to have, but anyway, There it is. Okay, Kevin on our Blue Bear Flutes Facebook group also said, flutes were used by natives for hunting, mimicking birds or animals. Did they use them for communication and signaling? And there's actually a Wikipedia article about the military signal corps, I guess you would, the drummers in the military. And yeah, so historically, there is at least one reference I can think of where southeastern Indians, specifically there again Cherokees, used a little flute, kind of like this one, to like ward off, if you would, spirits, bad spirits, people that kind of rode up into the camp is the historical reference. It's from one of Moody's books, so you can look up James Moody and see about some more information about what he had going on. But anyway, he had spent a lot of time with the Cherokee, and he had seen our little whistles that we made, little, 3-hole and 4-hole whistles and such. And a lot of southeastern native people made these, and I imagine probably most of us use things similarly. This is something that you can make a similar to an animal sound with, that isn't an animal sound. That, like, if, let's say, just imagine, if you will, you come up into an area that you've never been before. And even if you spend most of your time outdoors and you know most sea animals and what have you, you come into this new area, say for example, I don't know, the conquistadors or something come into this new area, they don't know what kind of sounds the birds make there. They don't. They only know the ones from wherever they've been and what they're familiar with. And if they ignore this kind of thing, like most modern folks do today, they wouldn't be able to disseminate the sound of this whistle to an actual bird. Although a native person who is used to using this whistle would recognize it immediately. Even if the tone of the whistle was a little different, because you got to think, this particular whistle is not one that I put on a tuner. This flute we put on a tuner to make sure it's exactly in key, because that's what we sell as a flute that's tuned these days. But truly natural made instrument, one that is not necessarily keyed to a specific scale or anything like that. They're going to vary from one person to the next, one flute maker to the next, and so on and so on, and how you play it from one person to the next. But in a military type stance where you've got native people in a trees and kind of hiding out from people that are invading them, it would be a very helpful tool in signaling. A sound that people aren't familiar with, that sounds kind of like a bird, but not exactly enough so that I'd recognize it. And small, high-pitched whistles like this were definitely mentioned, having been used for such things. And the high pitches actually travel quite a ways further, which is why we hear birds off in the wild. And birds actually use them, for that matter. It's where we learn these kind of things from the animals. But birds use different sounds to alert. I've studied cardinals a lot. We sell cardinal whistles, but I've spent a lot of my life studying cardinals, not as a bird watcher, but just it's a next door neighbor that you really want to know more about, kind of thing. And I've noticed that cardinals, the male, the red one, usually flies down and he'll make a certain sound if he's on the ground versus the one he'll make up in the trees. And some of their songs are like calling songs. So native people have dances that we do, especially in the southeast. We have stomp dances, and we have things that we do that are calling parts of the songs. We call out and the people answer back. It's just like the animal. I mean, it's really, really something very special. But the call that this cardinal does is to tell his family to come in, that they can eat, that it's a safe place, that there's food here, and that kind of thing. Or they do have sounds saying, be cautious. There's another being, some kind of animal that might be a threat to us here. So if you fly here, be cautious. So, so many things that we have learned to do based on what the animals do. And all peoples do this kind of thing, but more specifically native people that we're talking about, absolutely. So yeah, we use them for communications and signals, and in ceremonies and just to kind of relax, and some of everything. I mean, anything you can imagine, I believe people would have used this for. So, and thanks so much again to Kevin for your question. This is a question that comes from Prem Baba Mani on video on YouTube on making the Native American flute in 5 minutes. One of my older videos, I really love it, and I always, I can't stress to you guys enough, I had so many people that had, I mean, granted the positive comments always outweigh the negative ones, but the negative ones stick out in your mind, you know, and there's so many positive ones too that stick out, you know, but most of them, if I repeat them, sounds like I'm bragging or something. So anyway, the negative ones are so easy for me to focus on. You didn't make this flute, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, I can't see what you're doing. There's no way you did this in 5 minutes, you know, oh my God. We made another video to follow up on that one of me making a flute in under 3 minutes. And yes, I did the same exact steps that I took here. I just breezed through it. I didn't spend as much time making it perfect. It did play, but we never posted that video. I haven't really no intentions of it. At that point, it felt like I was bragging, saying that I was making this flute. So, having said that, Prem Baba Mani had asked a very good question. And, you know, this is one that I really kind of sticks out specifically on this video, but really it's a good question on any video. And he says, "Hi Charlie, I know this is an older video, but how do you calculate the hole positions and sizes? You didn't blow into it until you just about finished it. Is it just experience?" So many good questions and so well thought out. I appreciate you, Prim, asking this very, very thoughtful question, beautiful question, very well written. And, you know, yes, it is an older video. And I say older video, I mean, today we're in the 2020s. This is 2021 for that matter. And I normally don't put dates on our videos because 10 years from now, I want you to feel like this is useful to you. And these are questions that I really feel, I mean, my wife picked them out. She reads more of these than I do these days. You know, it was a really good list of questions that she picked out. But Prem Baba's question specifically, you know, to answer specifically, in this video, it was experience. At the time that I made this video, once again, so long ago, you know, I used like a little pattern flute to mark the holes, and that kind of tells me within constraints that it's going to play a certain way. If you make a flute, basically, let's say 1,000 years ago, a flute maker wanted to learn how to make a flute that sounded like somebody else's flute. You ask the flute maker, "Can I borrow your flute, or can you show me how to make it?" And they come up to you and they show you their flute, and then you take a piece of material that is about the same size as their flute. And I mean, this is very historically significant. You lay the node here on a piece of river cane, like in the video. Where the node is a very important area because it stops the flow of air from right here, and then that's where you're going to start your sound hole at, below the node. And that chamber below the node actually represents what is known as the flute. The sound chamber in here is what's going to determine the tone of this instrument. So, having said that, the flute that I used in this video, coincidentally, was a copy of a copy of a copy made just like that. This flute that I hold in my hand is an F sharp. That flute was not an F sharp. It was between a high B and a mid A. This F sharp still sounds really wonderful, and I adapted that old flute pattern to this size diameter internal makings of this flute. Adapting a flute pattern to fit your needs is something that you can do. If you know that, you know, the flute's supposed to make this kind of sound, you can make that kind of sound. A lot of trial and error. So I'm giving you the long, unabridged version of this question, the answer here. Most of my flutes that I make today, I have taken one of these old flutes and made a pattern out of it that was an exact copy. Step number 2 is to make the next larger or next smaller size that is near that same exact copy. And when you do, find out what happens with the fingerings. So I've got videos on tuning flutes. So if you haven't seen that, please make sure you watch our tuning videos. We've got all kinds of videos on tuning flutes. A lot of our videos don't say video on tuning flutes. It'll be like how to make a flute in A, and then I show you how to tune it. And my Flute Kit videos, those specifically tell you how to tune a flute kit. And we'll no doubt be making more videos on tuning flutes in the very near future. But in the process of tuning a flute, especially with the burning tools like I use, you basically, if you have a note here that's playing similar to what you think it should be, but it's a little flat, you can make the hole larger and it'll make it go sharp. And if the flute hole there is a little sharp, you can actually fill it in. I have a video for that too. Fill it in and then make it, re-drill it or re-burn it or whatever you do to make it less large, not really making it smaller. I'm making the hole less large because I filled it in, went back and drilled it back out. And then later, if you repeat this same flute size, just move the position of this hole. If it was too sharp, and we know that letting another finger off makes the note go sharper, that means traveling up the flute, letting your fingers off of these holes makes it go sharp. So what you do to make it go flat, like this hole here, if all holes covered and you uncover this hole right here and it's a little too sharp, the next time you make this flute, don't put it right there. Don't put that hole right there. Put it right there. Okay? Just trial and error. And eventually, when you get that hole exactly where you want it, the next step is to use this next one. There are, and I have been approached by people who made these programs, and I've been approached by people who've used these programs, so I know all facets of this particular example. But there are programs out there that will tell you what sound something makes. Relative, it depends on so many different constraints, to the diameter of a tube and how long the tube is. Some of these programs will tell you vaguely where to place these holes and how big to make them. There are things that it don't tell you, like experience can, such as if this hole is a little too flat, making it larger is going to make it go sharp, but that tool didn't tell you that that hole could possibly be flat. And more than likely, it's been my experience with people who have used these tools that the holes are almost always too sharp. So my suggestion, drill them out smaller to begin with if you use one of those crazy tools. On the other hand, I have a book full of all kinds of schematics for making flutes from one range to another, and I've got videos on making several of them that aren't even in the book that are either much smaller or much larger. And with that in mind, if you wanted to make a modern 6-hole flute, that's the kind where you have to keep this hole covered most of the time. Why you want to do that, I don't know. But if you wanted to do that, just do what everybody else does. Drill a hole in the middle there, Space all these holes relatively equidistant apart from here to there and make them larger or smaller as you see fit. That's not how the original flutes were made. It's just not. Originally, 6-hole flutes were much smaller in diameter, and the historic examples of this that people have copied and made them a larger diameter flute and used the same hole placement just didn't realize that placing the holes in that same location for a larger diameter made it wrong. I have learned, and hopefully I've helped a lot of people learn, that making a large diameter flute using that same old 4 inches from here to there, 1 3/16 inches from here to here to here to here to here, it don't cut it. That's for making a flute that is about a 1/2 inch to not even 5/8 of an inch in diameter on the inside. And historically, small diameter flutes work that way. Once again, something else that tuning mechanism won't tell you, if the size of your sound hole is a certain size. This sound hole is about 5/16 of an inch. It's about an average sound hole size that we make for most of our mid-size flutes. Anything from a mid-A to about a E is going to be around 5/16 in square diameter. With that in mind, the old flutes would be an A. The A flute would be longer, and it would have a much smaller sound hole, and it would respond completely differently than the flutes that people make today. And for that reason, to keep up with the modern interests of flutes, we make our sound holes a little larger, make the diameter just a little bit bigger. I can show you some history about that. But anyway, long story short, I based all of my patterns on historic flutes, and then I said, okay, this group here of holes need to be about this size, and they're okay where they're at. And after trial and error about 100 bajillion times, I realized that as a flute gets larger in diameter, these sets of 3 fingerings drift apart slightly, and they drift down the flute. And these 2 flute holes up here drift apart just slightly, and they drift up the flute, putting a larger gap in between these fingerings. It's kind of something that's mathematically provable, but we're talking about making a historic instrument here, not something that needs to be on the Sci-Fi Channel. So, and you're not going to be flying in one of these, hopefully. So, the math, and even aerospace engineers will tell you that the math is all great, but until you actually try that airplane, it don't fly. That's what they say. So, with that in mind, you got to try flying. As soon as you get your sea legs and figure out how to make sound with this thing, don't be afraid to experiment, because that's what it takes. And I have made videos of how to make a flute for under $3. Watch that video. I didn't even use a pattern. I mean, we see these things in our sleep these days. I can look at a piece of tubing and tell you right where the fingerings need to go. I mean, we've made that many flutes. But Prim Pabamani, thank you so much. I appreciate your question. Very thought out, very, very good question. And I hope that helps my very long answer. I hope it helps answer a lot of questions for everybody, and that's why I like to give those lengthy answers. This last one, very quick answer, I think. Also from the Making a Native American Flute in Under 5-Minute video. Have you ever considered making a flute out of a leg bone? Yes, I have. The most significant historical referenced flutes from the Americas were made out of leg bones, deer leg bones, alpaca leg bones, and yes, human leg bones. And I have thought about it. My grandmother from my mom's side was from Panama. She was a Kuna Indian. If you ever get a chance, look up Kuna, K-U-N-A, or C-U-N-A, however you want to spell it. Look up Kuna Indians, Ripley's Believe It or Not, and you'll find all kinds of neat things that Kuna people made from human parts, because they were, even though they are the only, to my knowledge, once again, my little disclaimer on that, to my knowledge, Kuna Indians are the only Native American tribe that the United States government officially recognizes outside of Canada and the United States, which is a shame, because there's a lot more. I mean, here in the Southeast, we have a certain number of Native people, and over in Oklahoma, we have a certain number of Native people. New Mexico especially has a certain number of Native people. Let me tell you something, the whole country of Mexico, if you haven't been there yet, you probably don't know, but most of those are Native people, and they're not mixed with Spanish. Most of them, the Spanish mix, mestizo, whatever you want to call them, population is about this big, and they're in pockets. And they're not all Spanish either. There's places that we've been that have pockets of Native people mixed with Germans and with other Europeans, and they have names like Schmidt and Brockenheimer and stuff, and it depends on who settled in that area, but you wouldn't know it by observing these people. Not only their skin color, their hair, their language, not Spanish necessarily, the other languages that the people speak, their customs, their everything. But they might live like in a silver mine town, and because of that, pretty common. And I know we're getting off topic again, but my point is, there's lots of Native people around the Americas and our islands, and I even consider the Polynesian people to be Native people. I mean, we're all kind of in this together type thing. But Kuna Indian people were renowned for making shrunken heads and shrunken bodies, and it's a technique that my grandma's people were incredibly good at. They knew some really amazing things, but the reason that they are recognized by the United States government as being Native Americans is because of the treaties that the U.S. government has with Kuna people. Although thinking back to a great Kuna leader named Uraka, I can't imagine anybody wanting to mess with them. But anyway, Kuna people had, made all kinds of things out of, people. So it's an honor for Kuna people to make a item from another person, because it means that they respected that person, and of course they killed them. And I'm not saying if you respect somebody, go out and kill them. Oh my gosh. If you respect somebody, let them live. That's the thing we do today. Kuna people, most Native people, used to get married in their early teens. I'm not telling you to do that. You know, there's a lot of people that sacrificed and what have you. I'm not condoning any of that. I'm not putting down my history though. You know, people were people, and we did all kinds of things. I mean, there's all kinds of sacrifices mentioned in a lot of books today, historical books, religious books, things like that. So lots of sacrifices. I mean, this is an example of sacrifice. People that have ceremonies where they get pierced have sacrifices. We get ceremonies where we scratch ourselves that are part of a sacrifice. All kinds of things that we do for sacrifice these days. There's all kinds of sacrifices that we've made and that our ancestors have made and that got us to this point. And yes, I've thought about it, but without knowing the person, I wouldn't make it out of a human leg bone, making it out of animal leg bones. I've actually made some flutes out of those, and we've got one video about it. We've got a few others on the way, which my wife specifically said, you know, we're going to need to make some more bone flute videos after this. I've got a good friend named Pan in Louisiana who makes some just, you know, forgive me, but some ass-kicking flutes out of some different animal bones and such. And, you know, he's really good at it. It's kind of retired from that kind of thing these days, I think, but a really great flute maker. And then finally, thanks so much again for that question, by the way. You know, that was from Restless Guardian on our YouTube channel, and that making that flute in under 5 minutes. Restless Guardian, thank you so much. Good question. I know I promised it was shorter. If you go back and check the time, I'm sure it was shorter. But anyway, finally, my question, and this one certainly will be short, but like I say, certainly one that I would think is very important. What's the most difficult thing for you as a flute maker or a flute player to overcome? What's the most difficult thing for you? And it can be anything. And this is a question I want you to answer in the comments, if you would. You know, we get emails all the time asking how to do this and how to do that and this and this and this and this. I have a video called The Secret to Native American Flute Making. And in that video, we talk about what most people have difficult with making a flute is the sound hole. This little area in the track up here, I could make hundreds of videos on that and you still not know how to do it if you're not getting it. If you are getting it, more power to you. There's still some things you can probably learn, because I personally, in the last 30 some odd years I've been making flutes, have learned so much stuff almost on a daily basis. And there are some techniques that I use, some little filing techniques that I've got a couple of tips and tricks videos about that will help you to produce a really good quality sounding flute, and one that has a really amazing tone. I don't care what people think about airy is. There's a sound quality that is at a plastic recorder level, okay? Then there's a sound quality that is a shakuhachi level. And somewhere in between there, we have shakuhachi, silver flute, the orchestral kind, and then we have like fifes, and we have Native American flutes. Then going back up the curve here, we have flutes that have just tremendous tons of lacquer on them. Then we have flutes that are made out of, you know, deforested hardwoods and maybe some other hardwoods. I mean, oak really does make one of them too. A really tense sounding, very brassy sounding instrument. Myself, even though my ears are ringing all the time, even they're ringing right now, I have levels of hearing that you just couldn't imagine if you just enjoy listening to music. I mean, I can hear whether a flute's flat or sharp within a range enough that I know if it's acceptable. And I mean, I use a tuner, electric tuner on tuning our flutes. My wife and I use, you know, tuners to make sure that they're right. But I can hear it when somebody's playing it. If it's the flute player, if it's the flute, even on one that I've never heard before for the first time, I can tell by the amount of push that the person's using, and, you know, once again up that range. And I'm going to tell you, flutes that are these cyborg instruments that have pieces of metal that are infused in them, or some kind of anti-wetting out blocks and stuff, and you know, that have whatever it is that has been injected into them and you know, made them this new modern thing that they've become today. Those are up here with a trumpet, okay? A brass instrument has gotten a reputation for sounding brassy, is what we say in the music industry. Some instruments sound very brassy. You can actually turn the treble up on a amp and listen to a electric guitar just in its natural tone, and it sounds very brassy. And that brassy sound is not one that is pleasing to my ears. I'm not bragging. This is one of my favorite flutes. I picked it up for this video just because I really like. If I were one of these people who really needed to sell this instrument, I would tell you that it has not only an earthy overtone, but it plays the notes clearly and precisely, that it responds, you know, I mean, I could make stuff up about this all day long. Whereas someone who is a novice or a beginning flute player, or someone who doesn't have the skill to understand the fine flavors between one variation and another, would say, that sounds airy. Yeah, I'm sure y'all probably, some of you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, there's a quality. A shakuhachi is an incredible sounding instrument. I mean, some of my, that Sledgehammer song from back in the 80s sticks out in my mind because of that shakuhachi, okay? I mean, it just has this incredible drive to it. It's the most airy sounding flute I've ever heard. And it's incredible, and I love it. I mean, if you haven't heard it, haven't fell in love with that tone, go listen to that song for 5 minutes so that you can hear it. Now it's in my head. But anyway, an instrument should sound like the instrument. It should sound like the wood it's made from and all this. So don't put your flute down. And I know we've gone way over our limit here. We're talking about it, you know, what your difficulties are. If your difficulty, I just described a lot of them, by the way, what they could be. If your difficulty is coming across to your customer and trying to sell your flute, you know, there's a way to do that. You don't have to overly elaborately, you know, push it and say that this is in comparison to this person's flute or this company's flute. That's not really what you need to do. You need to say, this is who you are, this is what this sounds like, and play it. And if it sounds great, and if you're a flute maker but not a flute player, you got to change that. You really you need to swap those two around for a while and live it. And once you've played your flutes enough that you are now a flute player, or, you know, I don't care if you don't take pride in them, you know, or what have you, just, you got to be a flute player first. You really do. If you didn't enjoy, people that enjoy listening to this flute sound, I just felt somebody turn off the video. If you don't enjoy listening to this sound that this instrument makes, I'm really shocked for one thing, but if you do, enjoy the sound it makes, you're really, in essence, you're a kind of flute player. So if you're trying to find the sound quality, is what I was getting at here, and if it's too airy, and you think that's airy, I mean, rethink what it is that you're comparing it to. Are you comparing it to a $600 flute made by XYZ company over here, that the price of the flute makes you believe the value is there? Or are you comparing it to the sound of a shakuhachi, which, once again, one of my favorite instruments, and a kina is in there. The pan flutes have a lightly airy sound, really amazing. That's what they're supposed to sound like. They're not supposed to sound like these brassy instruments over here. This is not a trumpet, okay? I'm not on a marching band field, and I'm not putting you down. Yeah, one of our viewers made flutes with his band, and they played them on the field of their football, you know, team and stuff in their high school, and I'm honored. He tracked me down in a grocery store. I'm really surprised that he lived in my local town, but you know, that's honoring to me. But this is not a brass instrument. Certainly, as a music teacher, he would agree. This is not a brass instrument. It's supposed to sound like it's made out of wood, not plastic. So, and plastic is up there with those hardwoods, by the way. We have a video about that coming up. So, if you have questions about flute playing, put them in the comments. If you're still listening to me at this point and you haven't turned it off, flute playing is really an amazing thing. And if you're having a hard time becoming a flute player, but you have been a flute maker for all this time, we got something to talk about. You know, it's a great question. for you to ask. So please, if you're having any struggles, any difficulties, like if it's Prim Baba had asked about making the fingerings, I've got schematics for all the fingerings that I use. Other flute makers use other schematics, and they put a useless hole right here for whatever reason on their 6-hole flutes. I do have 6-hole flutes that we make that aren't like that. Make sure you heard me. But yeah, if you have any questions about this thing, my gosh, I've been doing it for a while. That's why I talk about it. It's my passion. I love this instrument. It's incredible. You can learn how to play this thing in a couple of days' time if you've never played an instrument before in your life and be up on stage performing for people. To me, that is amazing. It is incredible. And that's why I go on. So anyway, I'll shut up. I'm listening to old Chief Bobby Johns right now. He's saying, Charlie, would you please shut up? So anyway, my ramblings aside, I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope that you are enjoying playing this wonderful instrument. If you're not, let's talk about it. I'll try not to be so talkative. I'll listen. So anyway, the camera person finally gave me that nod. Y'all take care. This is Charlie Mato-Toyela signing out for Blue Bear Flutes and BlueBearFlutes.com. I look forward to seeing you again a little bit less verbose next time. See you soon.